I think, yeah, now stage is all yours.
So thank you everyone for joining today and being here to hear some of my thoughts about the way that teaching and working with young people has changed in our new post-pandemic world. So thank you so much for spending this time with me. I know that many of you are here despite the fact that it is a festival day. So please stay for as long as you can. Questions are appreciated. And feel free, if you are on LinkedIn, to reach out to me and connect or send any follow-up questions. So to give you a little bit of information about where my perspective is coming from, I am an 18-year educator from the United States. I am from Buffalo, New York, and I currently work in the city of Buffalo. Buffalo is the second largest city in New York State outside of New York City. So we experience many of the same challenges of large urban populations. I've been working within New York State schools in urban education, rural education, and suburban education. And I also have worked as a charter school administrator. And charter schools in the United States are public schools, but they're able to engage in additional fundraising and make some more unique curricular decisions. Based off of my combination of experiences before joining education, I also worked in the medical nonprofit field. And all of these experiences worked together to allow me to become a pro bono food pantry coordinator for my current high school, which is what I'm going to talk about today in connection to how the job of teaching and the job of getting learners ready to learn has changed after the pandemic. So one of the first things that I just wanted to remind us of is that teaching and learning are both very essential to education, but they are both very, very different things. When we look at the definition of teaching, we're finding out right away that it is an occupation and a profession. Those of us who are in the teaching profession are here not only maybe because we love working with young people or maybe because we really want to make a difference in the world, but primarily we are teachers because it is our job that is paying for the needs that we have in life. As teachers, we need to complete our job in order to get our paycheck. And that's really what drives our participation, at least on the basic level in the education field. But for young people, the individuals who are learning or we are tasked with getting engaged to learn are doing so at a very different level. They're participating in education, mostly in my position here in the United States. Students are required to attend school or their parents could potentially receive legal consequences. So although young people are in school, in order for teachers to provide learning opportunities, the learners that we have inside of schools are really coming to us at a very wide range of preparedness levels after the pandemic. We know that a lot of life was interrupted in the past 2 years, not only for teachers in learning new and different technologies, in adapting to different teaching methods, in going online and back to school and back and forth, and helping to now mitigate behavior issues or more attendance issues. A lot of things have changed for us as teachers over the course of the pandemic. Yet we haven't changed any expectations for what we need from the individuals under our care during the school day. We need them to learn so that we are doing our jobs well. But a lot of the individuals who are coming into our schools these days, or that we are trying to reach and engage in the act of learning, are no longer prepared mentally, physically, or emotionally to engage in that in-depth task of acquiring new knowledge and skills. So, what I'm hoping to do today is kind of to bring us back a little bit to the basics of what teaching is and how do we actually engage students to the point where they can receive learning that is important to them while knowing that their underlying needs are also being met. And this is kind of where it comes in, the topic that I call myself and consider myself a social entrepreneur. In today's teaching profession, we are not only sources of information, we are also sources of support for students and families. And each and every day, teachers are being creative. We're searching out new ways to try to support students. Some teachers are working through sites like crowdfunding or GoFundMe or classroom support agencies. And we're really working as advocates on the part of our students. We are doing much more than just imparting knowledge. We're really helping to meet the needs that students have and young people have throughout their lifetime as young children in order to hopefully actualize their ability to engage in learning. So it's important to remember the difference that teaching as an act is a job and is a position. It fuels the adults' basic needs for housing, for food, for shelter, and it allows us to engage and feel safe within our communities by purchasing homes, by having cars, by engaging ourselves in education as we move up in the steps of Maslow's hierarchy. However, we have to understand that once we take a look and remind ourselves of that behavior foundation, that young people cannot self-actualize until they've had all of their other needs met. So this is the reminder, and this is kind of where the key message starts to come in here today. For teaching to occur and learning to occur, both parties must be ready mentally, physically, and emotionally to achieve success. And what success looks like is going to be different for everyone in this equation. Each teacher is going to self-determine their metric of success, whether that's based on a curriculum goal, whether it's based on reaching individual students or working with families. And those goals for teachers are also going to be adjusted based on the teacher's ability to engage highly within the profession. Throughout the pandemic, many families struggled financially, struggled with loss of loved ones, struggled with management of young people learning from home. And all of those are issues that do continue to impact our teachers and our teachers' families. Those issues also impact an adult's motivation to go into the teaching profession. As we've heard worldwide, there is oftentimes a lack of interest in entering into the teaching profession. We are in a challenging position post-pandemic, needing to work with our youngest students, our youngest citizens, who have kind of been left to themselves for a few years to create their own pathways for learning and self-engagement. And now, as teachers, our job is to once again take diverse interests and build them into one cohesive environment in which learning can occur. And that's a challenge for anyone, even if everything is perfect and in order at home. So we know that adverse experiences that occurred during the pandemic are impacting teachers, their families, and their children physically, mentally, emotionally, and financially. And those same things are happening to the students who are in front of us in our classrooms or who are expected to learn at home remotely. Now, in my position in the United States, we went to remote learning in the city of Buffalo for about 2 full years. During that time, we were just initiating a one-to-one or individual computer system. So many families within our district did not have internet at home. They did not have experience with computers. The parents didn't have the ability to help the students while they were with remote learning. So in the city of Buffalo, we saw a lot of learning loss happen throughout the pandemic because of the fact that students were and their families were being challenged to create a learning environment that they didn't completely understand. And students were also expected to engage in learning at a very high level using technology that they might not necessarily understand, that they didn't have access to, or that they didn't have the opportunity to engage with because the needs of their families came before their need to learn. And that's what we really want to consider as teachers post-pandemic, is that we are all working at very different levels of needs. And these are just really basic categories of needs that were determined by Abraham Maslow way back when learning theory was being developed. And he really focused on positive behaviors and how to build positive behaviors. And when can learning and self-actualization really occur? Well, we know through years and years of study and years of working with young people, and specifically youth who may not have everything they need at home, that it's the physiological needs that drive the majority of our behaviors. Post-pandemic, we know that 1 in 4 young people are struggling with access to food on a regular basis. So that means 25% of our classrooms are filled with children that are thinking about how hungry they are and are unable to engage with the actual learning process. It's something we need to consider not only as teachers, but as individuals who are responsible for the development of schools and the development for our future's leaders. Children are very well aware that if they're hungry, they cannot learn. In my position, working in a city, an urban school in Buffalo, New York, we have a lot of children who are hungry. Students in our school, 90% of them qualify for free lunch from the school district, meaning that those families do not have an income above the poverty line that would be sufficient to feed their families. The majority of students in our school use public assistance in order to purchase food, meaning that they're receiving contributions towards their family's groceries via something called food stamps, which they can then spend at local grocery stores. However, in my city, this is complicated even further by the fact that we are considered something called a food desert, meaning that for about every 7 miles of city, there's only one full service grocery store serving fresh fruits and vegetables. So even if young people do have access to food stamps, they might not have access to transportation to get to the grocery store to get the food that they need. So this is important when we're thinking about education post-pandemic, is that it's very basic. If children don't have their physiological needs met, if they don't have food at home, if they don't have heat, if they've recently been evicted because pandemic rent assistance has ended, all of these things are going to be preventing students from actually engaging in learning. And as educators, we can't necessarily ignore those things. We need to make sure that we are providing access in whatever ways that we can within our own personal bandwidth in order to ensure that students at least have a chance of reaching the level of self-actualization. We also know that within needs, safety is incredibly important right after access to food and physiological needs like shelter and sleep and fresh water. Many of our communities post-pandemic have increased in violence, specifically related to my community in Buffalo, New York. Not only are we a food desert, but we had a mass shooting that was racially motivated at one of our city's main grocery stores, which has led to a lack of access to food even further. It has also increased concerns with accessing limited resources within our city by our predominantly diverse populations. The city of Buffalo is an incredibly international city. And this also brings a lot of attention to us in the ways of how we are meeting the needs of new individuals to the United States. We know during the pandemic that social needs became a huge problem for not only youth, but also for adults. We have many children who lacked access to special education services, mental health services, physical health services. We have students who were isolated or who were asked to take on adult responsibilities within their families, taking care of their siblings, without being able to necessarily take care of themselves by developing their own social skills, going with their same age peers. Students who entered into the United States who were in 5th and 6th grades at the beginning of the pandemic are now in high school. And they missed out on a bunch of major milestones, like their first school dance or their first kiss, first youth relationship. And as we're seeing these young people transition into the high school level, we're seeing that a lot more immature behaviors are following up to the high school level, preventing students from necessarily engaging at a high level in the classroom. In the hierarchy as well is the need for students to feel positive about themselves. And we know that post-pandemic, more young people than ever are struggling with lack of engagement in schools, depression, anxiety, self-harm, and thoughts of suicide. All of those issues, physiological needs, safety needs, social needs, esteem needs, need to be checked off the list as having been accomplished before a young person can focus on self-actualization, which is focusing on figuring out what is going to push them past just basic life and really move them towards fulfilling a greater sense of purpose. If our young people are missing the top portion of that period, they are stuck on a plateau and are unable to move forward. This is something that has significantly complicated the act of teaching post-pandemic, and anyone that has been in a classroom with a wide variety of young people since 2020 will be able to tell you that individualized attention to student needs is exactly what's needed in order to help rectify some of the major issues that we're seeing in education, not only from the student perspective, but from the adult perspective as well. Both students and adults need assistance, time, and attention in getting through the bottom portions of the Maslow's hierarchy so that we can once again feel self-actualized and that our needs, not only for learning, but for esteem and for respect and for continued growth, are being met. Now, Maslow's hierarchy has been around for a very, very long time. And as educators, I'm sure everyone has heard of this or studied it way back in your education preparation programs. But as an 18-year educator, this is something that I have now started to explicitly teach and talk about with my students. I actually use the graphic that you can see on your screen now, and I have my students reflect multiple times throughout the year as to what level of Maslow's hierarchy they are currently working in. And doing this is actually really enlightening, because you can see which students are really stuck at which areas of the pyramid. And Maslow's hierarchy is really about approaching other people with a human perspective. We all have the same human physiological needs: air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and reproduction. Well, we don't talk about that one with the teenagers too much. If a student reports to me that they are struggling with physiological needs or that's where their focus is, I know that this is a student who I need to make an immediate connection with. Then I need to start building a relationship, build the trust so that they can share with me what is going on that might be preventing them from meeting those needs. One of the things that I do within my classroom to make sure that I am doing what I can to meet those needs is I provide access to water for my students. It may seem silly, but in urban school in Buffalo, we have water fountains, and many of our students don't have water bottles or reusable water bottles to bring to school. So I make sure that I have cups in my classroom and allow students to get water when they're needed. The same thing with food. In my classroom, I have a small peanut butter and jelly station in the back of the classroom where if a student comes into my room hungry, they can go back, make themselves a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, sit down, participate in class, eat, and I know that that need is satisfied for them. Shelter, sleep, clothing. Some of these things are things that we can help with in the school, but it also works as a teacher for me to already know what resources are available within my community so that I can confidently and quickly connect students to assistance in those areas. Now, I'm very lucky to be working in a school that has school social workers as well as a program called Say Yes, which is a community mental health support agency for young people. So knowing who to refer people to and giving kids immediate help will all help to build that bond between the teacher and the learner and help them to move past their physiological needs and hopefully to move more towards self-actualization. What we need to understand as we return back to education as teachers is that some of our young people and even some of our colleagues are worrying each day about their physiological needs. Where are they going to get food from? Where are they going to be staying that night? Are they getting enough sleep that is going to be making them effective and able to engage in an educational realm? For a lot of our colleagues, the answer is no. And schools have to become a place of support, not only for students, but also for teachers. As we look at the hierarchy once again, physiological needs, safety needs, love and belonging, and esteem are all considered deficit needs, which means that if a person is lacking any one of those things, it will become something that they have to fulfill before they're able to engage in the highest level of the pyramid of self-actualization. If a child does not have food, if a colleague is worried about losing their apartment, they are not going to be as effective as an educator. If a young person within your school is concerned about the safety of that school or the community in which they live, if a colleague is worried about the mental toll that is being brought on them by being an educator and is concerned about their ability to continue with education as employment, their safety needs are not being met. The same as we go with love and belonging. Many educators felt very isolated during the pandemic. There was a lot of positive press about the heroic efforts that teachers went through during the pandemic. But there was also, once teachers returned to the classroom, a lot of criticism about performance, managing student behavior, the pressure to mitigate learning loss that occurred during the pandemic. All of those stresses can prevent an educator from feeling as though they belong in a school. But for our students, that sense of love and belonging for education and for being in school was also lost during the pandemic. They lost the direct connection with their peers, with their school counselors, with their school administrators, and their teachers. They lost a sense of belonging, of knowing where they could go to get help, of knowing how the school day works, and the confidence in being instilled in a routine. And of course, esteem. Many individuals within schools struggle with feeling as though they are doing what they need in order to achieve highly. Whether that is a teacher who doesn't have enough time during their day to complete their planning and might need to borrow time from their family at home in order to really feel as though they're doing a good job at work, or as a student who might have 4 or 5 teachers hassling them every day on why they didn't get their homework done, or where is their computer, or maybe they're hearing negative things from their peers. All of those needs, the need for physiological safety, the need for love and belonging, and the need for esteem, need to be actualized before we can even think to engage in any kind of teaching or in any kind of learning. So it's really important, as mentioned, to give students an opportunity and your colleagues an opportunity to share where they are within the readiness level for engaging in high-level teaching and learning. And we need this information because schools and education needs to be changed to help ensure that those needs are being met, so that we can actually be valuable, high-achieving places that are building youth and teachers who feel as though they're set up for success. Self-actualization is what we call one of the growth needs. It is the absolute top tier of Maslow's hierarchy, meaning that a growth need is not from a lack of something in your life, but it comes from an inborn desire to grow as a person. As mentioned at the beginning of our conversation today, one of the things that we've noticed during the pandemic is that many adults and many young people have turned to a very simple source of esteem reinforcement during the pandemic, and that source is their cell phone. With our ability to connect virtually with so many others, and for us to fulfill our needs for momentary joy by watching a funny video, learning something very briefly through a TikTok, we are not actually allowing ourselves to engage in the highest level of self-actualization, which is interest-driven and self-determined learning. That can only happen when all of the other needs are taken care of. A lot of times our cell phones and lovely channels like the YouTube channel we are on now oftentimes provide valuable learning experiences, but these are very temporary learning experiences. We need our students and our teachers to be able to consistently and thoroughly engage in the learning process throughout a long period of time to once again regrow the connections in our brain to value in-person learning that really deepens connections, not only within our brain, but learning with our peers, connections with our colleagues, and connections with our community. The thing that we need to remember is that the act of teaching is an adult-based need. We as teachers need to teach so that we can earn an income. Learning is a growth need that requires self-actualization. So in order for teachers to accomplish our mission of having our students learn and grow, we need to first reach those students and encourage them to grow through those different stages of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, checking off each one as having been accomplished or fulfilled before they are able to make the choice to engage in learning. In short, if the deficit needs of children aren't met, our need as teachers to provide a service to these students that we get paid for isn't going to occur. Now, of course, we know that our jobs as teachers are to provide instruction according to our curriculum. But post-pandemic, the job of a teacher has become even more complicated by many of the experiences that not only teachers, but also students have gone through during the course of those years of the pandemic. Recently, there was a study that was published by the Journal of American Medicine that indicated many of the changes that have occurred since the pandemic. Between 2016 and 2020, there were noted increases in anxiety and depression in all groups of children's ages. There were also great decreases in physical activity, as well as decreases in caregiver mental health, and decreases in individuals' abilities to cope with parenting decisions during the day. So we are noting that during the time where young people were not in the care of teachers and were not necessarily present in schools, that there were increased demands being put on them both mentally, physically due to a lack of activity, and from external forces like adult stress and caregiver issues, such as the lack of childcare during the pandemic. We also know that over the course of the pandemic, studies have shown that year over year, now heading into year 2023 of post-pandemic education, that there have been significant increases in diagnosed behavior and conduct issues in children. There has been decrease in medical care and vision visits, and increase in unmet healthcare needs. We are also seeing increases in the number of young children whose parents have lost their employment, causing them to move their homes and uproot their lives during the pandemic. Each of these issues not only provide stress to the children who are undergoing these adverse childhood conditions, but it also adds additional stress to the learning process. And let's not forget that many adult educators are also parents who have been seeing these changes and dealing with these changes in their own homes, with their own students, and with their own children as well. In essence, the act of teaching has become more focused on increasing mental health, increasing self-advocacy, and meeting the needs of children that were not able to be met during those 2 years in which children really had a significant change in formalized education. Before the pandemic, we knew that young people struggled when they spent too much time on screens. We knew that screen time was a mental health issue that worldwide we were actively working to combat. Once the pandemic became apparent that changes needed to be made, a lot of the research regarding mental health and screen time was thrown out the window in order to accomplish a learning system that was able to reach every child in real time. Now, the results and the impacts of the choice to rely so heavily on screens have not fully been realized. But I can tell you that from working with groups of students inside of the classroom post-pandemic, that students are tired of computers specifically, but they are not tired of their cell phones. Recently this week, in a discussion with students in my 10th grade classes, we found out that the majority of students within my class spent over 20 hours per day using their cell phone. Strangely enough, one student's statistics reported that he used his cell phone 27 hours per day. This is something we're going to be looking at more specifically, in that having so much attention to a small device has not only impacted mental health, it has impacted students' vision, in meaning that fewer students than ever can see information that is being presented to the class on a board or a chalkboard. We know that many students are struggling from attention deficit issues post-pandemic, and we are also seeing a specific increase in diagnosed mental health conditions, specifically an increase in anxiety and an increase in depression. And when students are feeling either of those two, they immediately turn to the reinforcement device that they have had the whole time, looking up videos on Instagram, playing their favorite game. And these devices are specifically designed to work with the chemistry of your brain to build addiction. So not only are teachers working with students who have not necessarily had their needs met, we also have a society that is built on constant positive enforcement of wanted behaviors aligned to the use of reinforcing or addicting technology. So we're dealing with mental health conditions, anxiety, depression, issues with food access, family issues, and now more than ever, we're dealing with addiction issues inside of the classroom, starting with children from a very young age. But how can we even begin to start to address some of these issues? Where we need to start is at the bottom of that Maslow's hierarchy pyramid, excuse me. And that's because not only are young people or our communities struggling with access to the very basic needs of life, but many teachers and staff members in schools are also struggling with these very same things post-pandemic. To give you some evidence to support what I've been saying, in the United States, at this time, we have approximately 5.6 million students who have anxiety. An additional 2.4 million students have indicated that they are struggling with depression. An additional 5 million students are struggling with behavior needs, and at least 9 million students, or 1 in 4 students in the United States, are living within a household where food is not guaranteed to be accessed on a daily basis. That leaves us with over 22 million young people in the United States alone who are dealing with adverse childhood conditions. Now, across the United States, there are approximately 73.2 million students enrolled in our public and private schools. If we have 22 million students who are struggling with adverse conditions that are preventing them from learning, that means that almost 1/3 of all students within our schools each day are not prepared or ready to learn. And even more than that, some of the teachers and colleagues that we have within our schools are also working under these adverse conditions that are preventing them from being their best selves at work. These conditions continue to exacerbate even though youth and adults are back in schools. For adults, Over 32% of adults in the United States reported anxiety disorder in the beginning of September. Over 24% of US adults reported symptoms of depression. And in a female-dominated field where education has most, in many schools, over 50% female teachers, over 1/4 of all women reported some type of mental illness in the United States in the last year. And finally, over 50% of adults in the United States indicated that they have become more concerned about their family's health and safety since the end of 2021. In short, every single person in a school is likely to be dealing with at least one adverse condition that is preventing them from bringing their best selves and activating their best selves inside of a school building. If you haven't had any formal experience or training with adverse childhood conditions, I do ask you to take some time to learn a little bit more about this today. There are some more links within our presentation. But adverse childhood experiences are what are considered the root cause of many serious academic, social, and behavioral problems that prevent a child from receiving full benefits in education. But as mentioned, these adverse experiences post-pandemic aren't limited only to children. Many adults are currently going to work dealing with many adverse conditions. If we take a look at this graphic related to adverse childhood conditions, it can help us to see that adverse events can come from almost every area of life. Within a household, if families are struggling with either child-to-child bullying, parent-to-child bullying, if the household is struggling with homelessness, potential alcoholism or drug abuse, which we know has been exacerbated during the pandemic, or even if there is any type of youth felt neglect, either physical or emotional, those are significant adverse conditions that are going to negatively impact both an adult and a child in a household. As we look at the roots of our tree and we see issues within communities, those can also impact individuals' readiness ability to participate highly in work or in learning. We know that in many of our countries, and especially in many of our schools in the United States, like the urban school in which I teach, there is an epidemic of poverty, poor housing quality and affordability, structural racism in the fact that many of our youth are feeling as though they are not represented in their communities or in their schools with the terms of the curriculums they see. Do they see themselves in schools? And do they see schools as meeting their needs? Finally, the biggest factor that was an adverse condition during the pandemic was, of course, the fact that we had a pandemic. And daily young people, adults, and their families were concerned of losing loved ones or of falling ill themselves. Many of our staff and our students continued to be fearful daily of catching COVID-19 and the impacts that that may have on their families. Each of these concerns prevents those individuals from being able to participate at the self-actualization level. Now, you might be saying, Rachel Kent, how can we take all of this into consideration and do something about it as teachers? We are only one person. Well, what I can say is it only takes one person to make a big change in a life. My personal opinion is that post-pandemic, To achieve self-actualization of both staff and students, schools need to become hubs of support for the whole child and for the whole staff member. This means that we really need to focus on mental health, social emotional development, identity, academics, cognitive development, and physical health. I have the privilege of working in one of the community schools in Buffalo Public Schools in Buffalo, New York, and we are committed to helping students and their families to develop in each one of these areas. Through my work within this international school, I have firmly accepted that the whole child approach is one that honors the humanity of each teacher and student. We are all human and we have the same human basic needs. As an educator, I feel it is my responsibility to approach each child as a human first, ensuring that they are meeting the needs and able to check off all of those items for safety, food, security, in order to be able to reach the level of self-actualization. This starts by creating environments of belonging and connection in which students and adults can thrive. What you currently see on your screen is a picture of my classroom in which I have started a school-based food pantry. This is a free grocery store for students within my school, and this is something that I do pro bono, meaning it is not a paid part of my full-time teaching position. This is something that was developed in partnership with students after having completed our reflection on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Now, here are my recommendations of how you can engage students in order to help meet their needs and move everyone towards self-actualization on the hierarchy scheme. First, focus on joy in your classroom. You are a source of support for those young people and the other staff members within your building. You need to, however, take care of yourself first and find what joy you had that brought you to the teaching profession. Maybe you're here because the teaching profession pays the bills, but at least we can find joy in the fact that our bills are paid. But what I did was I focused on the fact that I received joy from helping others achieve their goals. I ask my students to reflect on their definition of success. I read those and I help to incorporate how to achieve their definition within my classroom. I also really enjoy running a business. So instead of running a business for profit, I run the grocery store for free, which is a free grocery store. And I have taught my students entrepreneurship skills along the way. They've been able to sense my joy, and through my efforts, I've been able to receive over 1/3 of our school population voluntarily working within our school grocery store to support the needs of their community. The second thing that I always do is you have to listen. In order to meet someone's needs, you need to understand their needs first. Being open to hear difficult things from student lives and being able to offer immediate support is essential to catching the attention of today's youth. They're used to immediate feedback and access to information on their phones. So every time an adult who they believe is in a position of caring for them says, "I don't know," or "I can't help," that turns the student away from the education system even further. So by listening to students, not only was I able to help them obtain food resources that they needed. But we were also able to identify the fact that many students within our school did not feel comfortable having enough clothing to wear during the school day, or having clothing that was appropriately sized for their return to the school building. With that, I started what is called the iPrep Boutique, which is a free clothing store for students in our building, which we provide everything from shoes to socks to underwear and undergarments, shirts, pants, and everything in between to help students feel physically comfortable coming back into our school. And we also provide clothing resources for our community. With that, we also do provide free personal hygiene products to any student in need. Toothbrush, toothpaste, shampoo, personal hygiene, tampons, anything you need, we can get it for you. The answer is always yes at our school if a student says they need help. The third thing is focus on impact. Identify needs that you can help to reasonably meet within your community, considering your own personal bandwidth. And then reflect, how can you involve students in making that impact real? By working together with our communities within each of our individual capacities, we can mitigate the impacts of adverse childhood experiences that are related to this pandemic, and that will continue to impact our youth as they transition into adulthood. This, for me, started with one simple gesture. During the pandemic, I noted as a remote teacher that many of my students were expressing that they weren't able to come to school to pick up free meal packages. So in 2019, I started a delivery route where I drove meals to student homes. In 2021, I moved to another school within our Buffalo Public School District, and this school expressed a higher need for food support. These students also, as we returned from the pandemic, struggled greatly with access to personal hygiene items, as that was an expense their families couldn't afford. In partnership with a group of 9th through 12th grade students, we initiated personal hygiene product drives. We initiated a coat drive and a clothing drive, and then we ended up creating food baskets for our students to take home on long breaks to feed themselves and their families. This, and through the process of finding my joy and listening to students, helped me to move from an outsider within our school community to somebody who was really on the inside of knowing what students needed and helping their families to grow. We were able to create real impact through our project, and in under 4 months, we created a full service grocery store where we were able to supply over 8 tons of food to students and families within our community. When you get a moment, I would encourage you to take a look through the video that we have here, as I know that we are just about to reach the end of the presentation. I did want to share one more slide with you before we left. And that is that this type of work makes real change and real impact in our communities. Focusing on student needs is what allows our students to achieve highly. In my first year at my school last year, I was able to lead a group of urban learners with very, very wide-ranging needs and behaviors and challenges and adverse childhood experiences to win a national award, the only kind that was given to students in New York State. Went to my students last year for their efforts in creating a school-based grocery store. We were also able to receive over $15,000 in donations and funding for school-based needs resources. And we were able to partner with NFL players, multi-billion-dollar global corporations, and local companies to distribute over $100,000 in free assistance to individuals within our communities and within our schools. For me, as a teacher, focusing on students' needs has been the most rewarding experience of my career. Not only has it allowed me to connect more with students, but through this work, I have also been received national award and recognition, including being recognized as one of 5 teachers in the United States who are focused on improving outcomes for youth in today's post-pandemic world. To leave, I will say the key to anything in post-pandemic teaching is to listen to others, to your students, to your colleagues, and reach each and every person as a human first, and a teacher or a learner second. If we do that, we are sure to engage our learners. We're going to engage our communities. We are going to build up our profession from within, and we are going to start to see changes in the leadership abilities of our teachers and our students that we haven't seen before in the history of education. So I thank you for your time in spending with me today to learn a little bit about my perspective on education and teaching in the post-pandemic world. And I would be happy to field any questions if anyone would like to share their thoughts.
Yes, that was amazing, Rachel. I wish if we would have many teachers listening to you now. Obviously, I'm going to post this. Mr. Pankaj have something to say in his raising hand. Please, sir.
Yeah. Hi, Rachel. Very interesting talk, what you do for the youth and great learnings. So I work for an American university and 2 American schools. One is AP, another is IB. The virtual school I did not see any kind of problem faced by the student because they were always virtual and didn't have to adapt to anything. Now, you raised a very good, problem that students are tired of using computers post-pandemic. And so when you actually I would be going in the classroom and using the simulations and anything which involves computer-based learning. Should we restrict the use of the computers? Should we printouts, give the printouts to students instead of that they're accessing the computers? So what should we do?
I would say that the biggest thing that you would want to include is a choice. That's the biggest thing because our young learners are used to being at home and being able to choose what they did for 2 years. They were essentially adults, right? If any of us adults had to go back to high school and we started saying, no, you have to do it our way, we'd freak out. So there are students who really embraced computer technology during the pandemic and love it. And then, of course, we have some who are just, want that human connection, or they don't type fast enough to get the information into the computer, which was a lot of things that we dealt with during the quick remote learning. So I would say offer the choice. Here's the computer-based version or the paper-based version. It does mean more work for the teacher, but if it's more success for the student, it's something that I would recommend.
So maybe, what I understand is having a differentiation teaching approach and learning approach for the students.
Yeah, definitely. Because in our schools, at least in the United States, you know, students went from being very flexible, being able to use the restroom when they wanted. And if you were tired of your teacher, you shut your computer and the teacher disappeared, right? Sometimes students need mental days where they're not going to be as highly or intellectually engaged in the learning. So maybe it's a student who loves the computer, but they're just having a bad day today. It's always good to have a little higher engagement activity in the same activity that might be a little less of a cognitive demand, because we could always start students on a paper version of it and then move them up through when they're ready. But we always want to make sure that we have something that's for every readiness level for the learners.
And the other thought was you were measuring social and emotional learnings of the students. Now, they would have some social and emotional behaviors which they have acquired during the pandemic, and when they're coming into the post-pandemic classroom. So what kind of adjustment can be made in the classroom? I know you focused a lot on the food and the water, which is our need, but what other kinds of adjustment can be made in the classroom to achieve the social and emotional learning of classroom? So there could be one way out is engaging more them in the group activities. So what else teachers could do?
Sure. So as I kind of go through my class period, the first thing that I do is I consider the learning environment and the conditions, the lighting. I have a lot of windows in my room. We usually have some kind of a color, like blue color over the windows to kind of reduce the intensity. Many of our youth were learning at home on comfortable couches and, sitting there with a pop next to them and their TV on. So trying to bring a little bit more of a relaxed atmosphere. In my classroom, I offer choices with seating. We have the traditional desks. We got some comfier chairs. I have bean bags with lap tables for them so that, they can sit where they're comfortable and have a choice. The choices don't always necessarily have to be related to the curriculum. They can be in, choosing what different color pen you want to write in today, what color will make you happy, that kind of a thing. I always take the first 5 minutes of class, 10 minutes to make an individual connection with each student. How are you today? Making sure that I'm listening. If they mention a problem, ask, or do you want me to help or do you want me to listen? The students need to know that their teachers are actualized and are ready to help them, because during the pandemic, a lot of the frustration was that, we're working in chat boxes and some kids had Wi-Fi and some kids didn't. So reminding every child each day that they are important and that we see them, because they do feel invisible and hide behind their phones. Making sure that students within the classroom know their peers' names. They don't. They talk to their phones. They don't talk to their peers face to face. So intentionally designing activities where they have to engage with another in the classroom, or they have to be more present. I'm working really hard with my students on getting the cell phone out of the hands. So even if I just want them to listen to what I'm saying, you can print off like a page. I want you to color this in according to something while I teach, come up with a creative way to keep their hands busy so that they're off of their phones and they don't feel the need to pick their phones up. As I mentioned, part of the technology piece, I don't know how your learners are, but I ask them to look at their phones regularly. How many times did you pick up your phone yesterday? 298 times. Okay, man, you should not be picking up your phone 298 times. So we have to have some kind of a replacement activity for students to start to engage in. With social emotional learning, I ask my students to draw things a lot. A lot of students got into art during the pandemic, and that can help to kind of bring them back into the present with social emotional things. Draw me a picture of how you're feeling. But it's just about respecting the fact that within the classroom, not every child's going to be ready to learn every day. And even though as a teacher, we need to teach every day, we need to modulate the level of learning we expect from each student. So letting them know that it's okay to have a bad day. Like, it's okay. We have 300 days together this school year, but we have to have a better day tomorrow. And how can I help you?
So that means if you talk about, and that's what we meant last learning. So the 11th and 12th graders, they have developed a different kind of attitude during the virtual time we have, and when they're coming back to in-person classroom. Should we, do a lot of assessment also of them, a formative assessment, because 11th and 12th graders, they are there to, have more knowledge. So they're knowledge-based students, and they're going to acquire more knowledge rather than, focusing, on their skills, because they have already acquired skills and they're going to use those skills to acquire more knowledge. So what kind of adjustment we should make in the post-pandemic world in the classroom when we are with the 11th and 12th graders?
With 11th and 12th graders, I always talk future focused. What is your definition of success? And what is your definition of happiness? Those are the two questions I focus on with those students. I find that bringing back those two questions over and over again and having the students reflect on what they're doing to achieve their definition of success and what they're doing to achieve their definition of happiness, and reinforcing that those skills that we're working on in the 12th grade level, this is going for your happiness and your success. As teachers, we've already made our success. We've got you to this point. So now it's time for you to shine. And of course, you're going to want to give them frequent assessments, but you want to once again tie that to, this is your success now. This is your income. And in a year or 2 years, this is all on you. So I am here as your facilitator to help achieve your definition of success, but I can't achieve it for you.
Great. Thanks again.
Thank you. Great questions. And I do see that we're just about out of time.
Yeah, because I have 6:45 another session. I'm, so glad that this continued discussion, because this is what makes it useful, right? So if it is not thought-provoking, then you will not have questions at the end.
Yeah. I'm very happy to connect on LinkedIn. If anybody would like to talk further, I'm very open to discussion. And as I mentioned, my perspective is coming from an educator in the United States, but kids are kids, right? A lot of our kids have the same needs, and what works well in one area is going to work well in another. It's all about caring and meeting the needs and lifting the kids up.
When you were explaining, I was thinking same thing, it's just the geography is different, but when it comes to basic needs, it's everywhere it is same. As you rightly mentioned, it's human needs. So I think I did not find anywhere that this is completely different or something else that is happening in US. It is actually, when I was talking to people from Nigeria, Uganda and South Africa, different places, I could connect that, there are many things which are familiar and not actually each and everything. We may find it, a bit more or less, but need is same everywhere. So that is why I think connecting the education and educators across the world is really important. Interaction, exchange of information, and I think many things are happening on political front and economy, but first thing needs to be education, where a lot of exchange must happen. And I think many things we have to give, many things we have to take from